I just want to start out by saying I have never agreed with legacy admissions. Not once. I worked in universities for over a decade. I never thought it was fair. And now apparently, because of that Supreme Court ruling to overturn affirmative action in universities, it appears that now other groups, including civil rights activists, have decided that legacy-based admissions is unfair and unjust. I want to go ahead and get into this clip from NBC. We're going to start with this one where they actually discuss the inquiry into Harvard-based legacy admissions and the civil rights groups that decided to push back. And then we're going to show you where they are right now today, because Harvard University is facing yet another lawsuit. Let's go ahead and get into this clip here.
Late tonight, we are learning the Education Department is opening up a civil rights investigation into Harvard and its policy of legacy admissions. You know legacy admissions, right? That's when schools give preferential treatment. They sort of give the edge to people whose families already went to the school. This whole issue of legacy admissions has been very much in the spotlight since the Supreme Court's ruling that struck down affirmative action. Some critics of that decision said essentially, well, okay, how is legacy admissions getting in because of your family allowed? Some advocacy groups say about 3/4 of those legacies who are white would not have gotten in if it wasn't for their status. Spots they say would have been given to other applicants otherwise.
Let's pause here for just a second, and I want to chime in about legacy-based admissions. Having been on admission committees, I want to explain to you how this works. So let's say you have an applicant who is a legacy. Now, if they're a leg, that means that someone in their family, it could have been their father, their mother, their grandfather, etc., graduated from Harvard University. There are other colleges that have this as well. It's not just Harvard, like Yale and Princeton, etc. Even Amherst College here in Massachusetts, which is not considered Ivy, so to speak, but it is a hoity-toity liberal arts school, right? I don't know how else to describe it, but a hoity-toity liberal arts college. Even they had legacy-based admissions, but they actually removed it fairly recently. But basically, the way that this would work, let's say that you may not meet all the requirements that Harvard is looking for, but you're a leg. And what that means is that because you have someone in your family that graduated from Harvard, even if you don't meet all of those requirements that Harvard is looking for, that means you can still get in simply because you are a legacy. Now, a lot of these legacy members of universities like Harvard or Princeton or Yale, it is not uncommon for them to donate to the university once they have graduated, right? I don't know about you, but I didn't donate to my college. I did not. I didn't donate to my college. They called me literally the week after I graduated from undergrad asking for money. And I was like, honey, I took out student loans. I have to pay back, the education that I got. I have to pay that off. I don't have money to donate to you, especially because you want a new baseball field. There was nothing wrong with the one you had. No. So I haven't, but it's not uncommon for some of these legs. If you look at Harvard and you look at some of the people that graduated from there, like Robert Kraft, who owns the New England Patriots, people like Mike Bloomberg, it's not uncommon for them to donate to the university once they have graduated. So legacy also equals money. And if a student who is a leg goes to that college, it's most likely that they're probably going to donate once they graduate as well. But it's not fair. And it reminded me of something. If you ever saw the movie Legally Blonde, we're going to go back for a minute. In the movie Legally Blonde, I remember there was this scene where, Elle actually went to Harvard University to get her ex-boyfriend back. Like, it's not like she wanted to be a lawyer, but she went there to try to impress him and show him that she can be intelligent and to get him back. When she got there, she realized that her boyfriend already had a fiance, so he was already engaged to someone else. That's how fast that happened, right? But his fiance told Elle at one point, did you know Warner didn't even fully get in? And Elle was like, what? And she goes, he was waitlisted. She said it just like that too. He was waitlisted. His daddy had to make a call. That's very real. I know Legally Blonde is a movie, but those things do happen where sometimes the parent who is a legacy of that school will make a call to make sure that their kid gets in. And no, it's not fair. You shouldn't be allowed admission just because someone from your family went to that school. And a lot of times those people tend to have money. That's not fair. And it does take spots away from people who may have earned it based on the admission criteria. Let's continue.
Harvard tells NBC News in a statement that it is in the process of reviewing its admission policies to make sure they comply with the law. Let me bring in Jake Ward, who is covering this story that is developing tonight for us. And it is an interesting one, Jake, because the Supreme Court striking down this affirmative action policy, huge deal, right? Monster headline. We covered it several weeks ago, end of June, when this happened, because it is significant for the way that, you know, the potential for it to reshape college admissions. There was talk even then of critics of this policy, advocacy groups for students of color, who said, well, wait a second, if you're going to take aim at affirmative action, you got to put legacy admissions in the spotlight, too, right? Talk us through this.
Well, that's right, Hallie. I mean, we're in a world in which, in theory, according to the logic of the Supreme Court in their recent decision, you know, admissions are supposed to be even. It should be merit-based and not take anything else into consideration. But as research after research has shown, there is so much more to it than we thought, right? It turns out that being admitted to one of those top 12 or so universities and colleges, whether it's Ivy League colleges or places like Stanford or MIT, makes a tremendous difference to your financial prospects. And it turns out now, as the spotlight is coming in on Harvard, that it is not the world we or the Supreme Court has been insisting we live in. You know, we are not living in a place where it's all merit-based. It turns out, according to multiple complaints now, that it is far from a simply merit-based system. It has everything to do with prior advantages in life. And that's, of course, what we're looking at tonight.
Right. This is 100% correct. And it's not fair. It's not right. Danny said Malia Obama was legacy admitted. Bingo. Obama, remember, Obama went to Harvard. He went to Harvard Law School, but still, it's still Harvard. Right. So she was a shoo-in. Like, these things aren't right. These things aren't correct. And Rhett says, turns out this has been known for years. I know. I'm kind of surprised. He's like, turns out it's not always merit-based. Duh. It should be merit-based. It's supposed to be merit-based, but there are other factors at play. And so now what's happening is that some of the civil rights organizations, since that overturn of the affirmative action in reference to universities, they're kind of sitting back and saying, well, wait a minute, this is not fair, because if they're going to overturn affirmative action-based admissions at these universities, then shouldn't they also overturn legacy-based admissions? Because let's be real. Who is usually admitted under the legacy status at these elite institutions? White kids. That's typically who is admitted. Now, technically, none of this should matter at all. Technically, these admissions committees should not look to see if you are a legacy. They should not look to see what your race is. They should not look to see any of that stuff and just base it on the merits. But unfortunately, it's become so competitive over the years, particularly at those types of institutions, that they had to find ways to weed people out. And one of the number one ways they do that, and I talked about this weeks ago when the Supreme Court had that overturn, one of the number one ways they do that is by the standardized test scores. The SAT scores, the ACT scores for those that are going into the graduate programs, the GMAT, the GRE, that's usually what we had to look at first, right? So I think that college, to me, should be, attainable for everyone. I don't think you should have all these different tests in place to hold people back and prevent them from getting that opportunity. Now, the reason why colleges do this is because the ranking system, they want to, if they're in the top 10, they want to stay in the top 10. Trust me, I know. If they're in the top 20, they want to stay in the top 20. And they feel if they just admit anyone who applies, then that means that if those students do not perform well while they are students there at that college, that will hurt their ranking. That's what a lot of times what this is really all about. And your ranking can affect donations. So again, it all goes back to money. Let's continue.
Some schools have already started getting rid of this, right? The New York Times had a report now about how much the top schools, they're pointing out sort of how this policy gets into place. I'll tell you, it went viral on my feeds, this sort of assessment of the way that legacy admissions works. Talk us through that.
Well, that's right. I mean, you now have several universities, including my alma mater, Wesleyan University, along with Amherst and others, deciding that they are going to do away with legacy admissions. You have everyone, on that list there saying that.
We're just going to pause here for a second. Carnegie Mellon is in Pennsylvania. Amherst is here in Massachusetts. Wesleyan University, I also believe I forget where Wesleyan is, but Johns Hopkins is in Maryland. So these universities have already decided to eliminate a legacy admission.
They recognize that this is an unfair treatment. I mean, you've got to think about, right, the stats that go along with the complaint that we're seeing from the department, the investigation that we're seeing from the Department of Education now into Harvard-specific policies. They are looking at numbers that really are pretty shocking, right? If you look at the 2019 class alone, nearly 30% of those admissions are legacy or donor-based admissions. And when you look, I mean, as you said, that cited quote there from a study out of Duke University found that at Harvard, 3/4 of people who were either donor children or legacy children or athletes would not have been admitted. Those are white applicants who would not have been admitted. The other one, that really shocked me, I just...
Pause here for a second. Over 30%. That's crazy, right? Over 30% of them would have not been admitted. Legacies and donor-based admissions. Living right here, like in the Boston area, it's not uncommon to meet someone that attends Harvard that is not a leg in some way, shape, or form. That's not uncommon to meet someone that said, my dad went there, my mom went there, or my grandfather went there. Like, it's more common than you would think. And it also means that they are actually missing out on great talent. There are other applicants out there that I think, are really creative, very intelligent, and maybe intelligent in other ways, right? That they're just missing out on that talent because they're picking so many people that are legs and so many people that are donor-based admissions. Now, why is this unfair? It's unfair because not everybody has a rich mom and dad. Not everybody has wealthy grandparents that can donate to a university or can donate to the library of a school so that there's so much money that the school renames the library after them and their kids just get a freebie, just walk right in. Not everybody has that. So essentially what they are doing is they are closing the door in the face of people who are poor and people who are working class and those that are middle class as well. They're closing the door right in your face and telling you, you don't get to walk through this door unless you do this. So those applicants actually have to achieve so much more than someone who is a leg or someone who has a donor-based admission. And that's not right.
I'm looking down at the complaint here is, the donor-related applicants are nearly 7 times more likely to be admitted than non-donor-related applicants, and legacies are nearly 6 times more. So, if you just cast our mind back, Hallie, to that, decision and the arguments being made in the Supreme Court that somehow we're going to live in this world in which these things other than merit are not going to be taken into account, it just turns out we are so far from that, and that seems to be why this investigation is underway.
Jake Ward, thank you very much for your reporting and for bringing this to us tonight. Appreciate it.
Okay, so they have moved forward, by the way, and now Harvard is being sued. This is not the first time within the past 5 years. Remember, there was that lawsuit against Harvard University in reference to their admissions of Asian students. Remember, this was a big deal where come to find out that they were discriminating against Asian applicants that were qualified to attend the university. So here they go again with another one. So I'm going to bring up this clip where it says Harvard sued over overwhelmingly white legacy admissions. And here comes the lawsuit.
What its critics call a different form of affirmative action is now being challenged at Harvard University. 3 minority advocacy groups are suing the school over its legacy admissions, which gives preference to the children of alumni. This comes just days after the Supreme Court decision ended race-conscious affirmative action in higher education. CNN's Athena Jones, she joins us now with the details. And Athena, this has been percolating for some time outside the debate over affirmative action for racial preferences, the question of whether it's fair to give preference to the children of alumni. So where does this, what argument does the lawsuit make, and where does it stand?
When he said percolate, it reminded me of that song, It's Time for the Percolator. Do you guys remember that? It's time for the percolator. It's time for the percolator.
Hi, Jim. That's exactly right. This is really a discussion about merit. What qualifies as merit? If you're going to focus on merit, can you also give special preferences to people who have a parent or relative who went to Harvard or who are big donors to Harvard? These three groups, the three Black and Latino groups, are joining together to say that no, that is not fair. They say that these legacy and donor-related admissions, they get preferential treatment. The vast majority of them, nearly 70%, are white. And so what this amounts to is a policy that ends up giving an advantage to rich white students and disadvantages other students who don't have those connections or are minorities. Now, the complaint notes that the district court called these preferences given to legacy applicants sizable and significant. And the complaint really goes to great lengths to spell all this out by providing a lot of data using admissions numbers. And so let's look at some of that. They found that for the class of 2026, just under 2,000 applicants gained admission out of an applicant pool of more than 61,000. But look at that admission rate. 3.24% is minuscule. But it's very, very different if you are related to someone who has donated to Harvard or if you have a parent or relative who went. For donors, those applicants were 7 times more likely to be admitted with an admissions.
So again, money talks. So if you were the child of someone who donated to Harvard University, you were 7 out of 10 more times likely to be admitted. Money talks. When I tell you this country works for people that have money, this is just one example. It's not just education. It also applies to the employment field as well. Because think about it. Think about the kids that graduate from college, graduate with undergraduate degree, and think about the kids who easily just already have their foot in the door at some of these prestigious companies because of who they know and because they know them because they are connected to people in their family. Those people have the resources. Another thing I want you to think about too, a lot of these kids that are able to go to schools like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, a lot of times they come from families that have enough wealth to give their kids private tutoring when they're in high school. And that includes SAT tutoring as well, so that they can get high scores on the SATs, whereas everybody else doesn't have that option, doesn't have that opportunity because tutors are expensive. Their families can't afford to pay for it. So essentially, again, wealth is being rewarded. And those who are not wealthy are being punished. Why should that be the case in reference to education? Like, it shouldn't be the case, period. But when it comes to education, education should be a right, not a privilege. We have it backwards. If you look at countries that have tuition-free college, that makes sense. Why are we making it so difficult for people to attend a university? Why do we do that? And I don't want to hear there aren't enough professors, there aren't enough classrooms. Don't even come at me with that. Because having worked in the university system for over a decade, I got to tell you, there are a lot of professors. A lot of them just aren't hired at these schools. So there's plenty of people out there that really want to teach. The university likes to be cheap and not hire as many faculty members as they need. Instead, they'd rather overload adjunct professors instead so that they can save money.
Rate of 42%. If you have a parent or relative who went to Harvard, you were 6 times more likely than an ordinary student to be admitted for an acceptance rate of 33%. And so this complaint argues that this is just not fair. They want the U.S. Department of Education to call on Harvard to stop doing this, to call this practice discriminatory. And of course, the timing of this matters so much because it's less than a week since the Supreme Court severely limited the use of race in college admissions. And so these groups are arguing that if the court is going to do that about race, it is now even more imperative to eliminate any policies that disadvantage minority students while advantaging white students. Jim.
Well, Well, one interesting thing about these cases, if you go back to the Harvard case, the data that the lawsuit found was a whole host of benefits that came in the process, including for athletes. Right, folks who play sports, they got a big boost over the general population. But there were specific ways that this complaint lays out about how legacy applicants benefited during the admissions process. Can you lay out a couple of them?
Sure, this is so interesting. You're right. Athletes, people who have athletic skills, they also get a special leg up. But when it comes to legacy and donor applicants, they get all kinds of what the university calls tip factors that get weighed into their application. So for instance, if you are related to a donor, you could end up on the dean's interest list, which includes ratings for how important the donor is to Harvard. If you are one of these donor-related or legacy applicants, you have your application closely monitored throughout the entire process. They say it's annotated, so notes or symbols are added to make sure that admissions officers pay it special attention. And these folks also get flagged again when they're trying to narrow down the final pool of applicants. These legacies get flagged again. So a lot of advantages here that these groups are arguing are not fair and should be eliminated. Jim?
Be interesting to know if the dollar amount of donations can be correlated with increase in chances of admission. Part of a longer conversation. Athena Jones and you.
But education should not be for sale. Like, this is a big problem. And I told you I never agreed with this. I never approved of legacy admissions. And this is not right. And it's gone on for a long time. And it shouldn't just be Harvard. Like, all of these universities need to stop the legacy-based admission. Like, you shouldn't be guaranteed entry just because your parents or your grandparents were fortunate enough to be able to attend that university. You should have to meet the requirements just like everybody else. And it's really, I wonder about the future of education in this country. Like, I really do. This is a disgrace. It's been going on for a long time. I don't know why NBC and CNN are acting like they just realized this. This has been an issue for a long time. And it hasn't been talked about the way that it should. But no, I'm not down with the legacy-based admissions. JB said, this is why I think we should have tuition-free college and technical school for all. Then no one will be left out. But then some people will not have an outlet to show they're better than others. That's another thing too, like people like to have that to hang over people's heads. I went to Harvard. Thank you for the super chat, Dr. R. These legacy Ivy League schools can't be that great if these graduates go on to run the U.S. government and corporations. How's that going? That's a good question. Very good point. And David said it goes to show you that more kids should look into picking up a trade instead of going into debt fresh out of these overpriced colleges. And that's another thing too I want to mention. You have to start looking at alternatives. You have to start looking at higher ed alternatives, because at the end of the day, I don't know how long this is going to last, how long people are going to be able to keep up with this, because college is continuing to increase tuition. They're not decreasing tuition. They're not stabilizing tuition. And eventually it's going to get to the point where how many people are going to be able to afford to go to college? I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Roger. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott agrees with Sabby on legacy admissions. Sabby, when they called you after graduation asking for donations, you should have told them, help me get a 6-figure income job first, then we can talk. I like that. Also, this legacy-based admissions craps allows mediocre, mostly white, but not all, to get in high places with doing the least amount. Bush Jr. was a damn cokehead who did nothing but party in college. Another thing I want to mention too, another thing that legs can actually do is that, Another thing that legs can actually do is that if they're having difficulty in a class, or let's say they got a bad grade from one of their professors, their parents, who is the leg, can just contact the school and complain, and they can get that grade reversed. I've seen that happen too. I'll take that other comment, Eric. It's a crazy world out there. I'm telling you, it's a tough, tough world. Thank you for this tip as well, Roger. It's time for the percolator during the house music days. Sab, you said Money Talks, another house song. Money talks, dirty cash, I want you, dirty cash, I need you. Oh, that aside, I still say high schoolers study abroad for free. Black students, you too, study abroad. Make even HSBCUs buckle until public colleges and universities offer attendance free of charge, causing private to offer low cost attendance. Yeah. Like if you can, you have the opportunity to go to college overseas, especially if it's a country where it's free. I say go for it. Go for it.